Okay, hello everybody and welcome to, let's see, Monday, May 4th. I am just switching this to, there we go, a slideshow. And welcome to class, and I hope you all had a good weekend and enjoyed the beautiful weather. We had really beautiful weather here, so I hope you did wherever you are now too. Today we are going to get into the last topic that we'll cover in class, which is people and their roles in conservation. So today, I forgot that Eileen told me that my head is always in the upper right corner. So I will move this box for you. Okay, so today in class, you'll watch this video, my lecture, which is shorter than normal because like that little box says, I'm gonna ask you to watch a short film as the second video. So instead of the normal, like really short 3 to 6 minute example videos, I'm asking you to watch this 26-minute, really great short film on community-based conservation in Tanzania. And then after that, you'll do your mini assessment. So in the past few weeks in class, just to do a quick recap, we've looked at a range of issues regarding conservation planning and how to work with conservation in landscapes that humans also occupy. So, but first we talked about how to do conservation planning based on ecological indicators, right? So we looked at things like species richness and diversity, endemism, threatened or endangered status, rather than looking at cultural or economic indicators that might help decide why one area should be protected or how to protect that area. And then last week we talked about how to make agriculture more biodiversity friendly, and how to make developed areas like urban areas or suburban areas more biodiversity friendly, or at least like permeable to animals so that animals can move through them to get to another protected area. So in this whole scheme, we've been looking at basically how to plan for conservation while taking into account human activities. But we haven't really gone the full way to say, let's consider human cultural values and economic values as like a full piece of conservation planning. So that's what this week is going to be about people and conservation, and how to make effective conservation plans and programs when people cannot be factored out of the equation, and in fact are like a critical and central part of the equation for the program to work. So that's what your video is on today. That's what the short film is on. It's on a place where putting the people front and center was the only thing that made the conservation program successful. Now, your reading for today in the text talked a lot about what conservation is, depends on your perspective. And it went back to what we talked about in the beginning of class, how indigenous peoples may have been engaging in conservation for thousands of years in land that they occupy, but then when Europeans come in and take that land, we then perceive their presence on the land to make it not pristine, and that for the land to be pristine and protected, they have to be removed from it. So we saw that at the beginning of class, briefly we talked about that, but your text talked about that issue more. And so essentially, if conservation is a matter of perception, then we have to look at different perspectives to see which conservation approach will work best. So now if we were in class, I would ask you to look at these two pictures and say, which of these two things do you think is a better model for conservation of biodiversity in boreal forests? Both of these pictures are in boreal forest ecosystems. So which of these pictures do you think represents a better model? Okay, I can't call on you, but I'm guessing the class would have been somewhat split. Most people would probably say the pristine looking landscape on the right, because there's no people in it and it is as free as possible from human intervention. But the landscape on the left, many of you may have pointed out, it looks like a landscape in which human human settlements, towns, economic activity, social activity is in peaceful coexistence with that forest across the river. So when you look at those two landscapes, the landscape that's more vulnerable actually could be the one on the right. Because if a logging company comes and wants to cut down all the trees, it may be that there's no local community buy-in to protect it on the right side. Whereas on the left side, you have a community already there. And if we assume that that community is making a living off of the forest through logging of some sort, through recreation and tourism, then you can imagine that this community is actually going to defend that forest resource, right? So a community where people are integrated and have a strong stake in conservation is going to be a strong defender of that resource, right? So that's the ideal vision for conservation. Now, just because you involve people in conservation doesn't mean they always become the strongest defenders, but that's the model. Here's another example. So here we have two pictures of tropical, wet, lowland rainforest. And which of these is a better model to protect that forest? The one on the right has no buildings, better habitat, right? But the one on the left has a really fancy hotel. It's actually Eco Lodge that was highlighted in National Geographic. So you may look at that Eco Lodge and say, it's messing up the forest. Even though it's pretty integrated in the forest, it's causing light pollution and sound pollution and scare animals. But it's also making money and providing local jobs. And so it could get community buy-in to protect the surrounding forest, right? That lodge doesn't exist without the forest. People aren't going to come to that eco lodge if there's no rainforest. And so that means that the community in the surrounding area wants to protect the forest itself to keep those jobs and that income. In the picture on the right, that forest, it may be the only way that local people can get money out of that forest is by logging it or by hunting the animals to sell for meat or for illegal trade of animal parts, right? So if you make there be a separate stream of revenue for local people so that they protect the resource in order to keep that stream of revenue and because they appreciate the resource. Remember, we talked about that concept before. The idea of more exposure to a resource makes you appreciate it more. Then you potentially have a more resilient conservation model. So the short film you'll watch talks about this in detail, how Tanzania, the country of Tanzania, went from this model, which wasn't working, to this model or similar model, not a hotel, but a revenue and community buy-in model, which has been very effective. Okay, so before we go to that video, I just want to frame a couple things for you. So your reading for today had included this figure, and this figure is showing basically that what the text was talking about is there's all these different fields that come into play when we think about conservation. But normally we don't think about all these fields. We think about only this field, ecosystems and human impacts and what that's doing to the ecosystem. So I like this quote that was in your text as well from Aldo Leopold, a famous founder of wildlife biology. And he lived in the, well, geez, I guess he wrote this almost 100 years ago, but he was very active in the conservation community in the early 1900s all the way through to the 60s. And so he wrote, "One of the anomalies of modern ecology is that it is the creation of two groups, each of which seems barely aware of the existence of the other. The one studies the human community almost as if it were a separate entity and calls its findings sociology, economics, and history. The other studies the plant and animal community and comfortably relegates the hodgepodge of politics to the liberal arts. The inevitable fusion of the two lines of thought will perhaps constitute the outstanding advance of the present century." So what is he saying? he is saying you can't just stay in this bubble, and you can't just stay in this bubble, and you can't just stay in this bubble. You need to move outside of those bubbles. You need to have interchange and exchange and interdisciplinarity to solve these problems. Now, this is appropriate ending for this biology, for our biodiversity conservation course, because even though we were taking it in the Stowell building, I am in the environmental studies department, right? And so why am I teaching this course? Well, I'm a biologist, but also because I firmly believe that an interdisciplinary approach is the most effective approach to conservation. And environmental studies is an interdisciplinary field. So what environmental studies does is it tries to get out of these bubbles and look across all of these factors to figure out the best way to protect our natural resources. So I would like to think that the emergence of environmental studies as a field in part answers that call by Aldo Leopold to fuse these lines of thought, and that would constitute a major advance in conservation. Food for thought. So you are now going to watch your video and your short film and try and recognize these patterns in this short film. So it's about community-based conservation in Tanzania, and it's on wildlife management areas which integrate ecological, social, and economic factors. And so what I want you to look for in here is what were they doing before? Why wasn't it working? And then what were the ecological problems with before? What were the social problems? What were the economic problems? And how did the switch to these wildlife management areas overcome those problems? So your short assessment, your mini assessment will be all on the short film. So watch that short film. It's really interesting, and it also has really amazing scenery of African wildlife. So I hope you enjoy that as a fun little break in your day. And on Wednesday, we will be doing our last workshop. Your syllabus says no write-up, but I'm actually going to just have a very short, simple write-up, because otherwise I have no way of knowing you did the workshop. So we will have a very short, simple write-up that will be more of a participation grade than a workshop grade. But so get excited for that. On Wednesday, it's our last workshop of the semester. Okay, thank you all for listening, and enjoy that.